Well, welcome. Tonight we have somebody who's always working now inside and outside of the Milford town. Why don't we start with an introduction?
Al, thank you for having me here. I'm Brian Murray, State Representative representing Milford, Mendon, and Hopedale.
And Milford proper.
And did my part-time job as town council for Milford, yes.
I mean, that seems to be one-sided, that we get the benefit of not having to pay you full salary and full benefits,
Yeah.
but we get your expertise.
When it was first broached to me, I hadn't really thought about it, but, since I've been there and doing it, it really works well. Relationships that I have with the state are so beneficial. It's easy for folks from the Parks Department, the Water Department, certainly the Select Board, the police. Whenever there's any type of issue with the state, it's something that I'm able to help facilitate a lot easier.
And we get to annex the Brian Murray Library.
No library. We
I just remember that
Yeah.
your office was like a pseudo library for the town records.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I did have extensive files. In fact, it's funny you should mention that. I just got an email today from the engineer that I worked with when we did the Milford Field project, Scott Langdrum from Camp Dresser and McGee. And he reached out and he said, he goes, I'm going through my files here, and I have the as-built records for the town of Milford field project that we worked on together, 2012. We finished it. Would you like it? I said, Scott, absolutely.
Yes.
Let me know. I mean, I'm in Boston. I can swing by. So I'll be picking that up and making sure that the town has records of that as well.
Well, especially as-bills, because when you start looking at some of the issues you run into, the design is compliant to ADA. And then you go measure in the 36-inch space really is 34. Well,
Yeah. And it came up recently because Jonathan Bruce, as you know, chair of the high school renovation committee, asked me about plans for the field. This was a couple of months ago. Apparently, the town, the engineering department didn't have anything on it. So he asked me to reach out to Camp Dresser McGee. I said, Jonathan, everybody I worked with, they're probably gone,
Yeah.
Well, they weren't. And it was nice to reconnect with these folks who were wonderful people. We worked very, very hard on that project. There were a lot of challenges. There was the asbestos piping. We had to bring grade up on that field about 2 to 3 feet. So it was nice to reconnect with them. And we got the digitized plans, which Jonathan said are helpful for the project ongoing now in terms of, knowing what's there.
knowing what's there.
And like I said, just by chance, Scott reached out to me again today. He said, hey, guess what? I've got this as-built book. Is that something that the town would be interested in? I said, absolutely. So we'll be getting
Yeah,
that.
because here you are 14 years later. You're lucky if they kept the records in a way they can find them.
Yeah,
I have no doubt that they digitized them and locked them away somewhere, but
yeah.
now trying to find them and what it's going to cost.
They were able to do that. When Jonathan came to my office, he asked me, I said, that's all right there in that drawer. I said, if I'm not here, you just come, you go into that drawer. He said, well, they're all paper. I said, well, there's, 2010, 2012, that's what we dealt with, So he goes, oh, no, it's got to be so that's when I reached out to them. And they did have it on digitized format. So that's been helpful.
Well, that's one of the things that I think having you and Jerry still
Yeah.
involved. I mean, when I shouldn't call it the Benjamin Moore, whatever that project is, the remediation project, reared
Yeah.
its ugly head.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that we saved a fortune just by having Jerry's knowledge.
Oh, absolutely, Ben. I worked on that when I was on the select board, as you know, with the FinCom. Jerry, quarterbacked it for that point, and then you're right, it reared its ugly head again. But we have the information on it. We're working with DEP on it, and I think that's kind of an issue
Well,
that
just
we dodged a bullet
hiring a
on.
new law firm, they have to put in, I don't know how many hours just to come up to speed on the history.
Yeah.
We don't have to hire anybody. We got Jerry.
Oh, yeah. No, he's a tremendous resource. Again, issue popped up today that I just dealt with. about use of a water line off of Central Street. He had a lot of the back knowledge. I had back knowledge on it too. So it's a big advantage for the town, for us to have that information to build on.
Do we have a contract that says you have to give us so many years' notice before you retire?
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. It's been a nice fit, and if I'm not in Boston, I'm at Town Hall.
New bills coming up. First thing, always question, the budget, I guess, is still being negotiated.
Yeah, so, the way the legislative session works, it's a 2-year term. We're into the second year of the present term. That second year runs formal until July 31st, which means that following that, there are no formal sessions, but the rules change that we did this session allows the legislature to take up for votes in formal sessions any bills that are in conference committee as of July 31st. So a conference committee is when the House of Representatives passes a bill, the Senate passes a bill, and the bills, relate to the same topic, but they're not identical bills. So the conference committee, which consists of 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate, gets together to negotiate those 2 bills to deliver a single agreed-upon bill that then can be voted on up or down, no more amendments, by both the House and the Senate, and then it gets passed on to the governor. So what we've been doing the last few months, both the House and the Senate, is working, I think, very focused to get as many bills as possible into conference committee by next month. And the state budget, that's one of them, of course. Both the House and the Senate have passed their budgets, and that's in conference committee, which is typical, and I would imagine that that'll get resolved over the next month or so.
So you have a 2-year term?
Yes.
Year 1 is prepping all the bills you want to vote on year 2?
Well, year 1 is generally, obviously, filing the bills. You've got to file your bills, I think, within 20 days of not being appointed, but I know it runs, around the end of January, so you want to get your bills filed. If you get them filed by that time, then it has to have a public hearing. You can file bills late, they're just not guaranteed a public hearing, but oftentimes, through connections that you have with the various chairs, you can get public hearings. But you want to get those bills filed originally as soon as you can, and then the balance of the year on the legislation deals with public hearings for those bills. So you get over 7,000 bills a session. They go to various committees, and then you start assigning the committees to hearings, and then overlay on that, of course, the budget cycle, which runs for the House from January through April. May, the Senate deals with the budget, and then June, July, the budget comes through in the conference committee.
Do I dare ask how the budget looks?
They're all pretty consistent, not much difference from what the governor had submitted. I'm trying to think for a second. I think it looks for an overall increase somewhere in the 3%. There's different variations, but they're generally all in the same ballpark. It's a conservative budget. It's a budget that realizes the reality of a federal government that is not our friend. It is, in fact, our adversary, which is very unfortunate to say. And we have contingencies built in, not only for the $3 billion plus that the federal government has already pulled from Massachusetts, but anticipated reductions that we will get going into the year from the federal government as well.
Above and beyond the $3 billion?
Oh, I'm sure there will be. There's always something that they seem to come up with. And then, of course, the Mass Health, the Medicaid cuts, those aren't triggered to come in until after the November election.
What a surprise.
Yeah, no politics playing there. And I think in Massachusetts, oh my gosh, we're looking at maybe 400,000 people that are going to lose health care coverage as a result.
Now, supposedly, they can work and not lose coverage.
Well, that's part of it, but there are other restrictions in there as well. And that part that you referenced, the work requirement, that's really kind of a red herring, because I think what the Republicans look to do, they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. Well, wait a minute, we're not cutting anything. There's no cuts here. You just have to work. But the regulations, first of all, that gear towards how to deal with the work are not fully drafted. I'm anticipating that they're going to be so onerous that a lot of people aren't going to be able to comply with it, and it's going to effectively result in further cuts, further reductions.
Now, wait a minute. For me to get federal aid, I have to meet a goal that hasn't been defined.
Yeah, those regulations haven't issued. No.
So how do I know what I have to do to stay within the?
Well, it's not even so much for the persons themselves. It's the folks working at Mass Health. So when folks call up or email and say, "Hey, what do I need to do?" The guidelines and the requirements
Aren't written.
aren't there. So they're in process. I guess the information that's coming down, they're going to be complicated. They're going to be difficult. A lot of people aren't going to be able to comply with it, and they'll walk away. And that's that's a practical cut, even though the Republicans can say, well, we didn't cut it, They just have to work and fill out the requirements. So that's kind of the new reality that we're dealing with, and that's kind of across the board on all of the areas that the federal government interacts with the state
But
government.
now, when you cut health care, are you really cutting it? Because people who don't have health insurance, say they lost it, they get a cold, they're not going to the doctor, they let it grow to be pneumonia, then they go see Jeff Hopkins over at the emergency room.
Exactly.
So $100 issue becomes thousands.
Right. And if they don't have health coverage, then it goes to the free care pool. And the federal government has cut back on that. The indication is, well, we're going to leave it to the states. Let the states handle that. So that's another expense that the state budget would have to allocate for.
Leave the expense to the states.
Yes. Yeah, so that's kind of the reality that we're in. It made it difficult for this budget cycle because and I remember I was talking to the chair of Ways and Means, and I said, Aaron, man, I don't know how you're going to anticipate, what cuts we're looking at. He says, we can't. He says, we just have to try to be as flexible as we can and deal with stuff as it comes down. And that's kind of the go-to.
Now, we were, I guess, fortunate. I tip my hat to Consigli and his crew, because they came back with a 2.5% budget increase for the school system. Now, I mean, you were involved in the school committee. That's a cut.
It's a huge cut, and more so than when I was involved, because health insurance costs are just skyrocketing. I think Milford, and Milford actually wound up better than a lot of communities. I think Milford's increase was 8-9%. A lot of communities are facing double digits. And the communities that self-insured on their private medical, have been facing disastrous results.
Well, I mean, just the salary increases alone. I mean, you've been involved with negotiations.
Yeah, sure.
And when they talk about 3% increase a year, that doesn't include the lanes and the steps. And
Right,
so all of a sudden, 80% of your school budget is labor.
right,
And that's going up 4 or 5% a year.
right.
And I think that's why they had over 20 or close to 20 contracts not renewed.
Yeah,
They just couldn't
Yeah.
afford it.
yeah. So that's the reality we're in, and, knock on wood, so far we've been able to manage things both at the state and local level, and, hopefully continue to try to do that. But, you've got to stay attentive, you've got to stay vigilant, and, again, flexible to try to, make up for any gaps.
Yeah, when I saw the governor's proposal that Milford School Chapter 70 would go up 0.6%, it scared the heck out of me this year.
Yeah,
But I worry about next year,
yeah,
because if we let 18 people, I guess you're not laying them off, you're just not renewing their contracts, which, if I'm counting on that paycheck to make my mortgage, it all feels the same to me.
right, right.
But next year, doesn't look like it's going to get much better.
Well, that's a long way off, so a lot of things can happen and change, so we don't know. But, I think it's important to be aware of the future, but not look too far ahead and just kind of deal with what we have and what we know at the time.
Yeah, Milford's going to be in a unique position for us. I mean, when I first started hearing the estimates for the new high school, $500 million, 400 million to $500 million. I never even thought numbers that big on a local. You deal with it, $63 billion budget on the state level.
Yeah.
But for us, that's going to be an eye-opener for people.
Well, it's there are times when you want to build things and there are times when you don't. And, this is not a good time to be looking to build something. Fortunately, Milford is not in that position yet. Milford is in the position of planning what to build. So, I think that's okay. You go through that process. But, with the economy, with what it is, in terms of inflation, cost of materials, fuel costs, gasoline costs, oil costs, which, permeate across the budget, across the economy, and increase all items, it's not a great time to be looking to build things. Will things change in 6 months, a year from now, 2 years from now?
Who knows?
I would think.
Oh.
I remember when I was faced with the field project back in 2010, 2011. And at that point, it was about a $2 to $3 million project, and we got a lot of blowback. Well, this is a bad economy, people looking for work. I said, this is a great time to build. And we got excellent bid prices on it because contractors were looking for work. Yes, absolutely. So, again, on something like that, it's a huge project, no question about it. I've got full confidence in the building committee that they're going to be examining all of the different options available and come up with a recommendation that really suits what the community needs. And then it's going to be a question of, when to best tackle it.
Well, they came up with, I want to say 13 options, and they narrowed it down to realistically 3 or 4. And now it's a matter of narrowing it down to 1 or 2.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and that's kind of the process you go through.
And it takes, when I asked at a committee meeting, when will we have a number? Because that's what people want to know. Right now, everybody's speculating. Could be as low as 300 some million. That's kind of the floor. Could be as high as 400 some million. Well, that $100 million mark means a lot on their taxes.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think I've said from the beginning, I don't think people can comprehend $400 million expense. But they sure will know what it means if you're telling them you're going to increase their taxes from an average house in Milford of $6,800 by $1,400 to $1,800 a year.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what choice do you have if you're not going to invest in your kids?
Well, schools really they're the prime attraction for people to come to your community. Generally families, that's the first thing they look towards. So you've got to keep your system strong. You're probably like me. I still call it the new high school.
I keep calling it the new high school, and everybody laughs at me saying, that's 50 years old, new high school.
Yeah, so it was built in 1973. Probably minimal work done to it since. So yes, it's time.
Well, it was so obvious when we had the boiler crash
Yes.
in the winter. and you couldn't go to Home Depot or Ye Old Boilermaker because the parts were 50 years old.
Right.
And the infrastructure hasn't been upgraded. Now, I'm interested to see, because one of the things I asked is, when will I get a formal number, not me get, but our committee,
Yeah.
for what it would take to just renovate the high school? Don't add anything, don't add Chapter 74,
Just
don't,
upgrade the systems and
Yeah.
the envelope and that type
and
of
they're
stuff.
saying it would be over 300 million. Well, you sit there and say, how much would we be reimbursed of that $350 million estimate?
Yeah.
And again, it's not firm. And then we were told probably nothing
On a renovation?
on just
Just the improvements and the
Just
upgrades.
bringing the upgrades.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, well, have they said that? And the architect said, no, they haven't told us they would not reimburse us, but they never have.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's kind of a polite way of saying,
Right.
I can hope to be young, thin, and have hair, but the odds aren't good.
Right.
So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see. What are the big bills coming up in your mind?
Yeah, so like I said, we're trying to get bills into conference. We just passed an early literacy bill. Again, both the House and the Senate had passed the bill. It went to conference committee, and I think it was last week, I believe it was last week that we passed that bill to basically direct the Department of Education to approach elementary curriculum for early literacy, reading, to go back to, I think, the way it had always been done, using
30 years ago.
phonics and, your basic reading skills, which, at some point, the system got away from. It was the newest, greatest, latest, most vogue way to do things, and it was a reading type program that, brought skills to a certain level and then relied upon, pictures and guessing for students to try to develop word structure, and it just hasn't worked. The reading scores have gone down. So this was something that went through the Joint Committee on Education, has strong support throughout the educational community. And like I said, we just passed that. I don't think the governor's had a chance to sign it yet. But that's an example of one of the bills that.
But what can you argue? You have a system, you think you're going to improve it. 30 years later, the data says it didn't improve it, it brought it down. So what do? Continue with it?
Yeah, no. You definitely have to pull the trigger and get out of that. So I think that was a
Kind
good
of
thing to
reminds
do.
me of back when Brookside and Woodland, the original Woodland, were built, and they did the Kumbaya thing where they combined all the classrooms.
Open concept.
Open concept.
Yes, yeah.
Which to me was noise amplified.
It was awful. It was awful. I remember being on the school committee, and the poor teachers, they would complain, rightfully so. They couldn't hear themselves think, let alone try to teach something. So I remember a lot of the work that we had done back in the 90s was setting up, walls or structures, creating the classrooms in there that, weren't done originally. And then, of course, the eventual total knockdown of Woodland and the new school, which is
Reconfiguration Brookside.
and which is a traditional school building, took care of
Well,
that.
anybody who tried to teach would have the same complaint that I've got to coordinate my lesson plan with the lesson plan of the teacher next door, because if I'm having quiet time and she's having open discussions, I can't get any attention.
Right. Yeah. No, it was crazy, but I think that was something of the 70s. I don't know. That's when Woodland and Brookside went up, and they were not successful.
Well, at least it's behind us now.
Yes.
I was surprised that there was a movement to change the marijuana laws.
Yeah. So that was a proposed ballot question, which got taken to the Supreme Judicial Court for evaluation, and they ruled that it's not proper to go forward as a ballot question. I'm not real clear on who were the proponents for that. I take it, groups, I think just opposed to cannabis generally. I don't know if it's more than that. I didn't follow it that closely. But the whole ballot question process is really getting out of control. The original intent of allowing, the people to put forth, petitions to get questions resolved, the laws passed.
Kind of like our Milford citizens petition.
Yeah, so it's really, the process has kind of gotten overtaken by lobbyist advocacy groups that spend large amounts of money to hire signature gatherers and have people sign these things. And it's not so much, kind of, originating or generating from the true will of the people. It's kind of being put forth by advocacy groups who, don't have success otherwise in trying to get their agenda satisfied. And I think it's reached a point where, that might be something to look at.
Well, it got shot down from, if I understand it right, a procedural aspect.
I'm not sure on the cannabis one. I'm trying to remember now what like why that got boxed out. Because I know that just recently the SJC ruled, maybe today, was it today, that the rent control ballot question can't go forward because it overlapped on religious grounds. It had, I think, religious exemptions or how it handled property owned by churches and that type of thing. So there's a lot of different complications that develop on these.
Brian, 100 years ago, we had prohibition. We said, we're going to pass a law and people are going to stop drinking. And all we did is take it and make an underground.
Absolutely, yeah.
You think about all the crime and revenue that went in. Now, we learned about regulations helping when we did the lottery,
Yes,
because the lottery kind of put most of the bookies out, not all, but most of the bookies no longer had their clients because you could go and, on track betting, off track betting, it's all regulated.
yeah, your sports gambling and your casinos, yes, yes.
And whether
you're
you
exactly
like it
right.
or not, whether I'm going to smoke pot or not, I like the fact that the money stays legal.
Yeah, no, it's a legitimate business. The cannabis industry is a major industry. It's more than just, smoking pot. When you go into some of these cannabis retailers, they're very, very professional. They're almost like, they are, in fact, a boutique type business. They have a variety of products, whether it's edibles, they have lotions, creams, other oils. It's a very, very expanded business. There are some very nice retail shops right in Hopedale and Mendon that offer.
But not in Milford.
But not in Milford. No, that's another story. But to me, it's obviously a legitimate business. We just passed a law this session to revamp the Cannabis Control Commission because I think you realize that they had some issues in terms of how they operated under the original law. Went from 5 commissioners to now 3 commissioners, all appointed by the governor, not appointed by different sources. Kind of streamlined the administrative operations of the CCC. So hopefully that agency will be a little bit easier to deal with. And kind of regulate, some of these businesses more smoothly and more professionally.
But I think the biggest thing is we learned that just passing a law didn't stop alcohol.
Correct, yeah.
And now we're
Did
saying
the opposite.
But now we're saying if we pass a law that makes marijuana illegal again, the criminals won't pick up the slack.
Yeah,
I don't get it.
Yeah, again, I didn't follow it that closely to really find out what the motivations were for the group behind that. But I think that's exactly what you have behind these ballot questions. You have advocacy groups, you have lobbyists, groups with agendas that they're pushing agendas, and they spend a lot of money, and they're not required to report a lot of that money. So it's difficult for folks to really realize who in fact are behind these questions. But even if that went forward, I couldn't see it passing. The genie's out of the bottle. I don't know that you could, turn back time and all of a sudden, outlaw cannabis. But yeah, so that one is not going to be on the ballot.
But you bring up a point about who's behind these, because the question about do you love your mother? Are you paying too much in taxes? Who's going to say, no, I don't pay enough?
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
So you go to somebody
Yeah.
and you say, if you vote for this, you can save 20% on your taxes. Won't have any negative effect. 20% of $60 million. I mean, we're struggling now with the school Chapter 70 only going up 0.6%.
Oh, yeah. No, and the SJC just ruled that question can't proceed either to reduce the state income tax from 5% to 4%. Again, that was pushed by really some multimillionaires, some high-powered business people. And when you look at the analysis, if there's that reduction, obviously they're getting back much greater money than folks who earn a lot less. So the benefit was going to be overwhelming to the larger earners. But I think the problem I had with that particular question, regardless of the SJC's decision, was, okay, the proponents are telling me this is going to stimulate growth and make everything cheaper. How? Where are the numbers? Show me the analysis. There wasn't one bit of objective analysis that was put out there to support those claims. So to me, that was irresponsible. And the reality was that, out of the $63 billion budget that we have at the state, we were probably going to be losing, I think it was like 8-9%, and that translates into a loss of somewhere between $5 and $6 billion. That's tough to make up, and that gets into some real programs and some real benefits that a lot of people in the state count on.
Well, just the state aid.
Starting with
when
local
we start
aid.
looking at Chapter 70, going up 0.6% when you know that your labor alone is going up 3 to 5%, not counting 8 to 9% in healthcare that you mentioned, and you're getting a 0.6% increase. Overall, you're getting a 2.5, 3% increase.
Yeah.
That's a cut.
Yeah.
So somewhere along the lines, you got to make it up,
Oh, absolutely.
because
Yeah.
you can't lay off that many teachers and still expect to have a
Right.
decent education
Right.
program.
Right. So, I mean, that's those folks that, want to, reduce the income tax, and, I can understand that. They'll be back. They'll have something else to try to.
Well, again, it's like, Brian, do you love your mother? Do you
Yeah.
want to cut your taxes? Sure.
Yeah.
I'm the first one to say we pay too much.
Yeah.
What's the alternative? Nothing.
Yeah.
You can't just cut and expect to keep the same services.
Right. So that was a dangerous question, but like I said, the court ruled on that one as well. So that's not going to be going forward.
Now, there's a side question, sorry to interrupt, that is the levy question.
Oh, that dealt with the Section 62F, where, if revenues come in at a certain level, there's got to be a reimbursement back to the taxpayers, which, that's only occurred once in the 10 years I've been in the legislature. I'm not real clear on that component. if that was part of the overall question, but I do know that leadership is very interested in that issue, and I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't some legislation put forward to address that one way or the other before we get out this session.
But that reminds me of Prop 2.5. I mean, we've been lucky that, I refer to it as profanity,
Yeah,
we haven't used 2.5 override in
Right.
Milford yet. But
Right.
at the end of the day, if you keep cutting state aid, and the revenue, I think our revenue went up 3.5, 4% last year. Expenses went up higher than that. The lines cross. It's only a matter of time before something has to give.
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. Yep, yep. So that's a big consideration.
And you turn around and say, okay, we got 24 kids in a classroom. Yeah, we can bring it up to 30.
Mm.
But then what are you going to do about the curriculum? How do you teach 30 kids?
Yeah, and now education has become so specialized. There are so many kids that have really different needs, so that the traditional classroom is almost secondary to a lot of the other smaller type programs which are essential. So that would severely negatively impact that kind of an educational process.
Yeah, and 60% of our budget in Milford is school-related.
Yes, yes,
It may only look like 50%, but when you figure out that we've got Parks Department taking care of fields, Highway Department
Right.
taking care of roads for the school,
right,
comes out over 60%.
right. When you've got the indirect costs, absolutely, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a major part, like we said, of any community, the schools are. Any folks that are looking to move or to go to another community, that's what they look at, number one.
I mean,
What's
years
the
ago,
school
we had
system
a
like?
town close to us where the school was being evaluated for not having accreditation.
Yeah,
Who would move to that town
right,
if you have kids? Even if you don't,
right.
moving there and hoping that the property values go up doesn't sound like a sound investment.
No, not at all, not at all.
And, I mean, a lot of people who don't have kids, the kids have gone through the schools, will look and say, well, I don't need the schools anymore. But what you said is true. You do if you want your house value to grow.
Well, that's true, and that's such a short-sighted argument. I mean, what would those generations have done if generations prior to them had said the same thing? It wouldn't be there for them to benefit from. So they need to, pass that on to other generations. That's a community. That's what gets done.
A lot of talk about rent control again.
Yes,
That
and
seems to come up about every 10 years.
I guess so. I know it's really pushed very hard in some of the urban areas. There's a big, strong movement in, your Cambridge, Somerville areas. Traditionally, they've tried to get bills through the legislature since I've been there. It just has not happened. So
Does it work?
Yeah, I don't know. I remember when I lived in Boston, going to law school, there was rent control, and we had an apartment. I think the rent was, oh my gosh, $800 a month or something like that, and we
It
packed.
seemed like a lot back then.
I know. We packed in probably about 19 guys in there. We had one guy, he stayed in the closet for 6 months. He lived in the closet. And it was a rent control apartment, and we just kept it that way. If one guy moved out, you just, keep the name on there and that type of stuff. There were other people in the building who also enjoyed rent control. They didn't need it, you know what I mean? They were well-working people and did well. There's an argument to be made that it negatively affects landlords. They're not going to be investing in the property. I think anything that you may consider, you've got to kind of separate your smaller landlords from your larger landlords. The thing might be to give communities the option whether or not they want to have it, none of which was in this bill. This bill was was very ironclad, and it would apply across the Commonwealth. So, the town of Hopedale would be in the same boat as the city of Boston, which, makes no sense. So the SJC ruled that that question cannot go forward either. I imagine there'll be further attempts at rent control. It's not something that I really am in favor of, but we'll see how the arguments go on
Well,
that.
I can see having to have a delineation between you owning a duplex and
Yes.
renting out one side, and me deciding to invest in a housing complex of 100 apartments. Different mentality, but if you limit my return, why would I invest? So yeah, I worry more about not having new homes being built, not having new apartments
Sure,
being built.
yes, and that's an argument against it as well. Absolutely. So it could be counterproductive. Folks think that it was going to, proponents believe that it was going to increase rental opportunities, but as you just pointed out, I don't think that would have been the case.
Well, if I'm looking at I'm trying to manage my portfolio, and I'm looking at a pure investment opportunity over here or in housing. If the housing doesn't look as good, I'm going to go into high tech or somewhere else.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I always ask the question, what happened to rent control? Because as you said, you lived it.
Yeah,
We had it. If it worked so well, why did it go away?
yeah, yeah. It got voted down, didn't it? Wasn't there was it a statewide ballot question 20 years
But
ago or
whatever the
something? I'm
reason,
not
it
sure.
went
I don't
away.
remember.
If it was something that works, it doesn't tend to go away.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, that was
But
another
I
issue.
can see the gut reaction when you start thinking about apartments in Milford,
Yeah.
little town of Milford, going for $1,500 a month. Holy moly, Batman.
Yeah, and they're going even higher than that, but, I think that you're seeing kind of a leveling off. There seems to be less of a demand, and certainly the commitment's been made to try to increase housing. The housing bond bill that we passed 2 sessions ago, a lot of those benefits have issued, and hopefully they're going to start to show, the increase in housing production, which would go towards reducing the overall cost as you increase supply.
Well, a lot of the surveys are showing that young kids, our kids, are leaving the state. And part of it is the congestion of being Boston and all, but the other part is just the cost.
Well, that's true. Unfortunately, affordability is an issue across the country. Just go to a grocery store or a gas station anywhere, and it's off the charts right now. A lot of people confuse that with taxes and cost of living, which is really 2 different animals. But that's the economy that we're in right now, unfortunately.
There's a bill or a referendum talking about collapsing the primary.
Yes.
What's
And I think that's able to go forward. So that would essentially eliminate your party primaries. So you would have one preliminary election, and say 5 people are running for a particular seat, Republican, Democrat, whatever, unenrolled even, or Green Party, whatever, they would all be on a single ballot, and the top 2 finishers would then proceed on to the final ballot in November, regardless of party. There are areas in the country that do that. I think this is the way the city of Boston votes, I believe. So the thought process is to try to separate the party influence from the primary system, because you tend to have both in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, people on the far end of the spectrums, and those are the folks that generally participate in primaries.
But how does that work? I mean, I like the idea of saying you're eliminating the party influence. But where do you get money to run a candidacy,
Well,
if you're not counting on the parties?
yeah, I mean, I suppose that could be an issue, you know, and I think like, you know, we were talking earlier, I mean, now, unenrolled, going to a primary can pick either ballot. You know, you can vote Republican or you can vote Democrat, so you kind of have a lot of that freedom right now.
And as I mentioned before the show, that's another confusing thing. I remember when I first moved back,
Yeah.
and I show up to vote, the primary, and Andrea is there, and I said, Andrea, I want a blue ballot, I want to vote for John Fernandez.
Yeah.
She goes, well, then you want a red ballot. I said, John's a Republican? She goes, no, in Massachusetts, the Democratic ballots are red, and the Republican ballots are blue. And it was, can you make it any more confusing?
Right. I know. Well, I'm sure John will be glad to know that you voted for him.
But you turn around and you say the whole concept of unenrolled.
Yes.
I don't like being classified as unenrolled because it makes me feel like I'm not participating in the process.
Yeah.
But you can't use independent apparently because there's an independent party.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. So it's unenrolled. That's the majority of voters right now, particularly in Massachusetts, and I think it's kind of a sign of a lot of people. They're not real happy with either party. So they want to be unenrolled, have that flexibility to maybe, support a particular candidate, regardless of party, if he or she, kind of addresses the issue that the, folks are concerned about.
Well, I think a lot of times you're not voting dogma. It's not, I'm a Democrat, so I have to vote this way. I'm a Republican, I have to, even if I'm one of the 12 Republicans in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I don't want to be forced to vote this way. I mean, I always joked and said, I have a show on that's called The Conservative View.
Yep.
They don't accept me as a conservative because I'm too socially aware. When they say gay, I say, who cares?
Yeah.
They say, no, you're supposed to say bad.
Oh, gosh.
And then the liberal view doesn't accept me as a liberal because I'm too physically conservative. And I know I am. I've always said,
Yeah.
I'm glad the town and the finance committee isn't all like me because we'd never spend any money. So there's a balance in there. So I declared myself purple.
Well, I mean, I think that's the way a lot of moderates are. They're certainly more free thinking and liberal and social issues, and more conservative in fiscal financial issues.
Well, again, it's hard not to be split because you asked me, are we paying too much in taxes? Absolutely. Well, what would you cut? Nothing. Especially in Milford, where I think we get a lot of bang for our buck.
Yes. Absolutely.
$6,800 average seems like a lot of money. But when you look at towns next door to us paying 50% more, we get a pretty good deal here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's all about managing budgets and starting with the spending. But Milford, for whatever reason, has been able to weather the storms pretty well over the years.
Well, and again, when I look at the negotiations we have for labor, and you've been involved in them, they don't seem to be as confrontational as other towns. You're reading the paper how the school committee is fighting the select board and not accepting their budget. In Milford, well, it's long about now, we start with the finance committee saying we're broke, we're destitute, beat
Yeah.
our chests,
Yeah.
right? And the
Yeah.
school committee coming back saying, we need $1 billion increase.
Yeah.
And then once the heroics and the drama's over,
Yeah.
we get back and say, okay, now what can we afford and what can we do?
Right.
And I remember the big battle we had over a couple years ago when the budgets were extremely tight. Not as tight as this year, but we were debating between 6.5% that the finance committee said is the maximum we can afford and 6.8%,
Yeah.
which is the minimum the school could.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
that's $300,000.
Right. Right.
Seems like a lot of money, but when you look
Yeah.
at a $150 million budget, arguing over 300,000 doesn't seem critical.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yep. That's certainly not, not a bad argument to have.
No,
You're in a good spot.
like I say, pick another town you'd trade with.
Oh, no, a lot of communities are experiencing a lot of very difficult things.
I mean, when you see the number of towns using profanity, that 2.5 override word.
Oh, there's a lot, a lot. And a lot of times it's not passing, and that makes the issue even more difficult because then they have to try to come up with a plan going forward, and that's not always easy.
And the killer is, okay, I can't afford it this year. Next year's going to be worse. You're into that death spiral of
Right. Right.
fundamental question. We've been having 9 and 10% turnout at the elections. Do you have any ideas on what we can do to get that up?
Well, the local elections, I mean, first of all, there really haven't been very many compelling races, over the last few cycles. I think that in and of itself is probably a big driver. But, I think the problem goes deeper than that. And I see it in the town. The level of participation from folks in the community on all of the different committees that we have is way down. When I first came back, in the 80s and certainly in the 90s and did stuff, I mean, there were people all throughout the community that wanted to be on all kinds of committees. I remember being on the school committee, and we had so many parents coming to meetings that I remember Tom Cullen, the superintendent, he said, let's set up some task force. So we'll have a task force on math, a task force on, and we put parents on these groups and, gave them the whole year, and they dug in, and they came back at the end of the year and had some great reports, great recommendations. It was a wonderful way to involve people in the community. That interest isn't there. So I think the election itself is kind of a reflection of community participation and involvement generally. I don't know if it's the fact that people are so stressed in their lives financially, with work, with children, with other obligations. I don't know if because the way things are on the national level, people are just so discouraged that they feel helpless, that they can't do anything. But when I talk to groups at the high school and other schools throughout the area, I try to encourage the kids, you're the next generation. This world is going to be yours, and you need to get involved with it, and you need to target problems, and you need to work towards resolving those problems and bringing people together. And, right now we don't have that. So, yes, the election participation is low, but more troubling to me, it's the community participation that's low as well.
Well, it's amazing when you start thinking about, we had a school committee, years ago, won by 13 votes. And I thought that was unheard of until 2 years ago we had it won by 2 votes. To me, no disrespect to the select board, but the school committee is the most influential committee we have because they dictate what happens with our kids 60% of the time.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And
Very
to have,
important committee, yeah.
and again, the select board is very important, but to have policy being made by a school board that has elected officials of 2 votes just stuns me. Absolutely stuns me.
Yeah, yeah. Those are the times we're in, and it's not, just endemic to Milford. I mean, it's throughout the state. I hear it from a lot of my friends and colleagues, and it's throughout the country. People aren't participating in their government. They're not participating in the community. People are tending to be more egocentric, self-centered. driven individually, and it's an unfortunate dynamic, particularly in the democratic form of government.
But again, to be egocentric, I care about me, me, me. Well, the best way to make sure that me, me, me is taken care of is to vote people in that believe issues like me, me, me. And when you sit there and say 9%, less than 2,000 people in the whole town of Milford turned out to vote, that's a scary movie.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally local elections were, smaller than other general elections, which always was curious to me because, as you say, the local election, those folks have much more impact on your life than who is in Congress or who's a senator or who the president is. But those are the elections where the numbers come out for. But when folks are having problems, if the trash isn't being picked up or if the street light's out or if the road isn't being plowed, I mean, they're not going to call the congressman. They're going to call their local, select board member or whatever. And I think folks, really need to realize that it's the local government that has the most impact on your life.
Any last words for the people of Milford?
No, we just keep battling day by day and, try to deal with all of these crazy issues in this crazy world. And, like you, I've been in Milford my entire life, and I remain optimistic greatly for the town of Milford going forward.
Well, like I've always said, I grew up in Milford and did what every Milford kid wants to do, run away. And I ran, and I loved Washington. I loved Paris, loved Maryland. But when it came down to having my daughter, that gravitational pull, something about Milford brings you back.
That's right.
And, I think the strength we have is our department heads love Milford as much as everybody.
Absolutely.
So, thank
Good.
you, as always.
Thank you.
To our 6 loyal viewers, thanks for joining. May tomorrow night be better than today. May God bless, and have a good night.